This week on Arizona Illustrated, stories from the Boneyard, a look at mental health in Tucson's Black community, a profile of poet Tere Fowler Chapman, and it's Condom Week from the Vault. Welcome to Arizona Illustrated. I'm Tom McNamara. It's one of the most recognizable landmarks in Tucson, yet it's one of the least understood. Sprawling over 2,600 acres in southeast Tucson, adjacent to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, is what's affectionately known as the Boneyard. The over 4,000 aircraft stored there are part of the 309th Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group, and every one of them has a story.
Before I started working here, I knew the same thing everyone else knew, that the Boneyard was a place that airplanes came to die, and that was it. It was just a parking lot, and they sat out here for 10 years and then eventually became soda pop cans and razor blades and other useful items. Airplanes don't just come here to die. About a third of the aircraft that are stored as regeneration candidates are going to fly out again, for us or for our foreign allies.
There's old planes and new planes, jets and props, fighters and transports, fixed wing and wingless. Some are just taking a rest before rejoining their units. Others keep their brethren aloft by donating parts. A few have given all they can and are moving from the Boneyard to the scrapyard. All the aircraft are here for a purpose, and each with its own story.
This airplane is a B-52H, and one of the changes to the later models of B-52, the G and the H models, was that the tail got shorter and fatter. One of the things they were doing to test this new vertical tail was flying back and forth on the eastern slope of the Rockies. This airplane in flight lost its tail, it broke off because of wind shear and turbulence, and the aircraft remained flyable thanks to the help of the Boeing engineers that were on the radio. And it flew back to Missouri where the weather was too difficult to land, so they subsequently went on to Arkansas. The airplane flew for 5 hours with no tail.
The aircraft here are under the care of hundreds of mechanics, engineers, technicians, and support staff of the 309th. And it's not a coincidence that they are here in the Sonoran Desert.
The Boneyard was established in 1947. It was picked primarily for two reasons. The climate is the first one. As you can imagine, storing all this metal, you want a dry climate so it doesn't corrode. The second reason is because of the ground. The 6 inches down from the normal ground is this thick clay, caliche, and that helps us stabilize the aircraft so that we don't have to put down concrete or any other kind of structure, and we can just roll the aircraft onto the ground. The oldest aircraft is a 1952 B-57 aircraft, and our newest aircraft are F-16s.
And there are lots of F-16s. Many, after being awakened from their desert slumber, pampered and updated, are being refurbished for flight. As with each of the thousands of planes here, the pilots often have the closest bonds to their battle mates.
It's an amazing airplane. They did a phenomenal job designing it. It's very simple to operate. It's a real pilot's aircraft. Being a small guy like I am, it's the first military aircraft. I've flown 7 different aircraft that actually fits me just fine. And it's an unbelievable combat performer. I've flown the aircraft in combat, and it's never let me down. And I think the aircraft that you spend the most amount of time in is usually the one you end up loving the most.
Prior to the F-16, the Phantom F-4 saw regular combat for the United States during the Vietnam War. There, during the 1960s and 70s, they engaged in dogfights with enemy MiG fighters. Some F-4s were flown off of aircraft carriers where they were stowed on deck right next to one another.
And the interesting thing about this airplane and its mate just over there is that they took off together from the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk on the 6th of May in 1972. Both of them were out over North Vietnam, and they were engaged by MiG-21s, and each of them shot down a MiG-21. So they were together that day, May 6th of 1972, and here they are 40 years later at the Boneyard, and they're 50 feet apart.
If these planes could talk, most of the tales they would tell would probably have to do with in-flight adventures, but not all.
This airplane is a modified C-130 called the LC-130, and it was modified to support our operations in Antarctica. It flew from New Zealand down there and would land on the snow and ice. You can see that it has skis instead of landing gears. And this particular airplane landed down there and then was getting ready to take off when the engine broke, and it caused some damage to the aircraft. So they ended up leaving it down there. It stayed 17 years in Antarctica and was covered by snow and ice. And eventually, the Navy decided to fly it out. So they took an engine down there, put it on the aircraft, flew it out, and it flew again back and forth between New Zealand and Antarctica for 10 more years before coming here for its well-deserved retirement.
Not every aircraft at the Boneyard had long, distinguished careers prior to their retirement here. A few served for just a short time, including a one-of-a-kind behemoth with a unique mission, whose first flight was in 2002.
This is the Airborne Laser. It's a modified Boeing 747 cargo aircraft and was used by the Ballistic Missile Defense Office to answer the question, hey, I wonder if we can detect, track, and engage ballistic missiles in the boost phase. The answer $2.5 billion later is yes. And if you see the other side of the aircraft, you'll see the scorecard that it has. The Ballistic Missile Defense Office did lose its funding because with elections, there are changes in priorities.
Less than 10 years later, the Airborne Laser flew its last flight here to the Boneyard. Understandably, it's the pilot and crew chief who keep the aircraft closest to their hearts.
It arrived on the 28th of July.
It hadn't been here a day or two before I got a hold of you then, I guess.
Let's go see your plane.
Jack Catalini is one of a very few Army pilots who flew jets. Jets flown into dangerous locations with special VIPs, senators, and Army bigwigs as passengers. Jack's Gulfstream was unmarked and undercover, disguised as your run-of-the-mill corporate jet.
It was a first for all of us. The Army never had jets. First time in something that can go up to 41,000 feet. Most of us spent our first half of our career flying helicopters. We never got more than about 1,500 feet off the ground. We've died and gone to heaven. This is as good as it gets for helicopter pilots. This was our last assignment. We had worked our way up. For me, at the end of that, it was 28 years in the military. We feel like they're ours, no matter whether we're all retired or not. It just doesn't get any better. It's just a wonderful airplane to fly.
With each addition to the inventory, another tale comes to rest in this corner of the desert. And while the grounds of the Boneyard may become crowded, there's always plenty of room for the stories.
Statistics confirm that Black Americans are less likely to receive care from a mental health professional, and yet the U.S. Office of Minority Health says that African Americans are 20% more likely to report having serious psychological distress than non-Hispanic whites. In our next story, we explore why that is and look into some hopeful signs of change.
Where are we going? We're going to the park?
Nearly a decade ago, Sonia Flippen found herself slipping away.
I was just out of it as far as having any kind of energy or wanting to do anything. I cried a lot and I didn't know why. I had awful thoughts. I felt like I wasn't needed or wanted. And it was just to the point where I wasn't myself.
Flippen didn't know where to turn for help, and her family didn't believe she needed help at all.
They thought that if, I just stopped and collected myself, that it would be okay, that I can get better on my own. I can stop feeling this way on my own. But no, that wasn't the case.
The idea that self-reliance can overcome anything, including mental illness, runs deep in Black culture, says psychologist Patricia Harrison Monroe, and it keeps many African Americans from seeking help.
There's considerable stigma in the African American community about the need to seek mental health services, and also a sense that one ought to be able to cope. People have gone through a lot of difficult times, and so needing to reach out, to go to a stranger to talk about some problems is just not something that many African Americans feel that comfortable doing or justified. I don't think they see mental illness as a disease that requires necessarily treatment. It's something that is better dealt with within the family, within the community.
And the statistics show it often is. The U.S. Office of Minority Health reports that African Americans are 20% more likely to report having serious psychological distress than non-Hispanic whites. Yet Black adults and youth are significantly less likely than whites to receive treatment, according to the National Healthcare Disparities Report. Harrison Monroe says these differences reflect a deep reluctance to seek care and a distrust of care providers.
There has really been kind of a tradition, a history of African Americans being subjected to a lot of experimental treatments, both on the medical side, but also on the mental health side. Historically, that's, if we think back to Tuskegee and the studies that were done where people were lied to about what the treatment, quote, treatment consisted of. And so I think in general, there is an attitude of hesitance that comes along with seeking any kind of services.
Part of the problem is a lack of Black providers. Harrison Monroe says she is, to her knowledge, one of only 2 Black licensed psychologists in private practice in all of southern Arizona. But it's not only who African Americans see, says psychologist Fred Wiggins. It's where and when and how they pay for it.
The number of people who have insurance coverage that would allow them to afford to be able to go to receive treatment is certainly disproportionately low in the Black community. I think that part of access, and then also where services are located. Many of the types of services that might be required aren't necessarily in the communities where people live. And then there's the whole we're open from 9 to 5 issue, and I work from 9 to 5. And so in order for me to go get counseling, I have to take off from work. And that is a problem in and of itself.
But even in the face of these difficulties, attitudes are starting to shift. The mental health field is slowly attracting more and more students of color, and both Wiggins and Harrison Monroe say they're seeing more Black patients who are willing to try treatment. Harrison Monroe says it's part of a bigger trend toward less stigma and more awareness around mental illness. Outreach efforts geared to the Black community, and in particular Black churches, have also helped.
We even had some of the participants come forward and say, yeah, actually, I've received mental health, and I've been not letting my congregation know because I've felt that stigma and I wanted it to be kept a secret. But I need to change my attitude about that it probably would be helpful for them to know that their pastor or their minister has sought mental health treatment.
In Tucson's Trinity Missionary Baptist Church, mental health has always been open for discussion. Pastor Elwood McDowell trained as a psychologist and now works to meld therapy and worship in his congregation.
So much of what I was trained to do in mental health and subsequently going to graduate school while pastoring in clinical psychology fits so well with what pastors do. It's almost impossible, in my view, to separate spiritual growth from psychological growth. I think they're so intertwined.
You can't please him by putting on a religious front. That's right, son. You have to trust in him. Yes, amen. Let us stand and sing.
McDowell says he's just expanding on a role that black churches have played since the time of slavery.
I do believe that we have kind of a built-in psychotherapeutic approach to preaching and worship. And I think that when people have a cathartic experience in worship and allow their emotions to come out about stuff they've been going through, it is therapy.
McDowell encourages the members of his congregation to be open about their struggles. It was here that Sonia Flippen finally found the help she needed. McDowell helped her start counseling, and that led to her diagnosis and treatment. Now, Flippen says, she has a very different and much more joyful life.
I did not know that there was so much help, that I had somewhere that I could take my problems with somebody who understood and knew what I needed to do in order to be better. Want to go this way?
Flippen's experience has also changed how her family sees mental health care.
That was a major turnaround point when everybody understood that there is something going on and it has to be treated. I have to take care of myself. The adults, like my grandmother, who's very supportive, they egged me on. Honey, you go ahead and do what you have to do to get better. We understand now.
In our occasional series, Art Life, we offer glimpses into life as an artist here in southern Arizona. Next, poet Tere Fowler Chapman.
Put your hands together. Welcome, Tere.
Thank you. So yeah, my name is Tere. I'm a Cadillac of wishes and a home of a billion dreams. See, I know the cage that is a beast, and I also know the bird that is settling free. I am shattered and scattered like wind. I am clutched sand thrown, overblown bones. I am home. See, I'm an unkept boy. I am Tere Fowler Chapman. I am a gender fluid artist. I work with poetry, spoken word. I run Words on the Avenue. I founded that in 2012. I'm the executive director of the Tucson Poetry Festival, and overall just a poet. I just think that it's a poet in 2016. We wear plenty of hats, so just a poet. I was born in Louisiana. My dad was in the Air Force, and so we bounced around a little bit. I landed in Phoenix for the longest period of time. What do you want to be? My firstborn when you grow up. And I was like, if I can't be a sidewalk, then I guess I'll be a cartoon. And she's like, okay, I don't know what's wrong with this child. I've always been really imaginative, really into storytelling and really into reading, but I don't think that I took it really serious actually until 2011. I really try to stay true to the moment. With my poetry, they're hearing it more than they're actually reading it. My parents had clear expectations. When you grow up in conservative households, and more importantly, when you break out of that and decide to do your own thing, and decide to just be yourself, it feels really, really good. Really, really good to be your authentic self. I am a molder of tomorrows, and I'm a meddler of hope. I am a lifeless doll out of a child mother's mind, and I am waiting. I am waiting to be picked out and picked up. I'm waiting to be cleaned and carried. Because see, I am a dream. I am a dream. I am a dream, and to be a dream, it is something.
else. Welcome back.
Words on the Avenue is the only open mic of its kind, and it's an open mic that is dedicated to words in the city.
I'm ready for a real superhero. Someone who can tear the stigma off mental illness with their bare hands. Fly above the street jacket skyline.
It happens every last Sunday of the month at Cafe Passe. The community just comes down with whatever work it is, as long as it's written, and they share it.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah. Okay. The reason why I started it was because I remember getting excited about poetry, but not really having anywhere to go to just read. I remember like being in Tucson and like not necessarily seeing like a lot of artists that like looked like me. And so I almost feel like it's a responsibility to be like a poet and make sure that if anyone is sitting in the audience that they can look up and see themselves. Yes, yes. When I'm on stage and I make the decision to like perform for an audience, I want to be visible. I do take the bus a lot, and it influences my work because this world is just too fast. Being on a bus and having to plan out my day and plan out where I go, it just slows it down. The sunrises are crazy, how they just like melt into the windows of the bus and just like light everyone up, whether they want to be lit up or not. It's a very beautiful experience. The bus is different every single day. Some days it's super inspiring and like whatever's around me is kind of like what I'm getting inspired by. There's so many poems on the bus. From a far away generation, from a far away galaxy, a girl unwept, then I unraveled in time for the time. For the time I am a child that is built out of pyramids. For the time. That poem is about like how being an artist of color, like navigating this world, and we all started off as dreams. Like literally that's just what we were. Like our mom was 2 years old carrying around a baby doll and is now literally has kids. You're on this planet because you were someone's dream. And that's something that we all have in common. We are at my favorite place in the world, East Point High School, and I co-teach the spoken word, the creative writing class with Logan Phillips, and I teach women's health here. And it's just such an amazing school that takes this concept of like community in classroom and infuses it with art and like local leaders. Snap if that's true, right? Mondays are hard for everybody, and they're especially hard for younger people. So every Monday we take a film, and it's usually between 10 to 15 minutes, and we watch it as if the film was a poem. We're trying to see like what poetry tools like filmmakers and producers like yourself kind of pick up on, like imagery or even like stanzas, like how words are broken up in films, and we just dissect it and try to kind of put it in our world. Cool, let's talk about it. So, the film's about a dictionary, the first dictionary ever in her language. And why would the filmmaker then shoot a dirt road if we're talking about a dictionary? Like I can think of one teacher, Miss Phillips in 5th grade, that was amazing. And like if it wasn't for her teaching me how to write my first book, which was called The Clown Who Could Not Juggle, and like encouraged me as a writer, I don't know if I would have made it past those years, like so from 5th grade onward. But I had that, like that one person that like told me that they believed in me. I teach to be that for students, hopefully, for them to realize that you can learn about hip hop in a classroom and that's okay. You can break down films in a classroom. Being able to do that and being able to think out of the box is also educational and intellectual. There's so much devastating stuff happening in this country. She's wearing a $50 ribbon shirt. It's even more devastating when you think about the entire world. But it still feels good to be here. It's this really weird balance, you know. It feels good to be alive. For the time, I'm the sun's son. No? Well, then I'll be the moon. See, I'm a seed destined to death. I'm seed beneath the bloom. I'm cocked wrist before the boom. I am chariot. I am direction. I am a molder of tomorrows and a meddler of hope. I am a lifeless doll out of a child mother's mind, and I am waiting. I'm waiting to be picked out and picked up. I'm waiting to be cleaned and carried because I am a dream. Because I am a dream. Because I am a dream. And to be a dream, my, it is something else.
National Condom Week was started in 1978 by students at the University of California, Berkeley. Over a decade later, it had moved from a local campus event to one that was embraced by universities, high schools, pharmacies, disease prevention groups, and family planning organizations. Here's how it looked in Arizona in February of 1990 from the vault.
11 years ago, condoms were not a fit subject for public discussion. You certainly couldn't mention them on television. Some people still wish you couldn't, but the spread of AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases has changed all that. National Condom Week, the 11th National Condom Week, is very public. Condom Week coincides with Valentine's Day to link the fancies of romantic love with the realities of sexual activity.
In this country, sexual activity is high among adolescents and among adults, and it leads to the birth of beautiful, healthy children, and it also leads to the highest incidence of unplanned pregnancy and disease in the Western world.
The U of A Student Health Service is kicking off National Condom Week with an exhibit on the mall. They're passing out free condoms and sponsoring a number of contests. It's a popular display, as you can see. The question is it changing behavior?
I really feel that some students are choosing to protect themselves and think sensibly. If they choose to be sexually active, many more of them are using condoms.
Do you know what message they're trying to get across?
I guess be safe, you know, be responsible.
The fact is, according to the National Center for Disease Control, the percentage of sexually active 15 to 19-year-old women increased from 47 to 52% in the last 6 years. That's why you're hearing so much about condoms and why you're likely to continue to hear more, whether you're a member of the targeted 18 to 24-year-old group or a senior citizen.
Thank you for joining us here on Arizona Illustrated. Next week, Shakespeare's coming to Tucson, or at least the first folio is, published in 1623. The first folio is the first collected edition of Shakespeare's plays. We'll celebrate with soliloquies, bookbinding, crumhorns, and your favorite Shakespeare. Then we'll hang out with one of Tucson's funniest people, Paulie Casillas. Performance past and present on Arizona Illustrated. I'm Tom McNamara. See you next week.